There are places in America where time simply stopped. Towns that once had names, streets where children ran, saloons full of music, churches full on Sunday mornings. And today, they stand empty. The wind is the only thing that walks their streets now. The dust settles on porches where families once sat in the cool of the evening. We call them ghost towns. And they're not a legend. They're real. They're out there, scattered across the American West, and you can visit them if you dare. Each one holds a story of why the life drained out of it and never came back. Some are stories of bad luck, some of greed, and some, folks say, don't have an explanation at all. Today we're going to walk these forgotten places together, down their empty main streets, past their leaning saloons and collapsed cabins, and we'll listen to the stories that still cling to them. This journey isn't like the others. Out here, what got left behind still has something to say. Come along with me, if you've got the nerve. Let's start with a simple question. Why does a town die? You'd think a place with houses and a church and a schoolhouse would last forever, but a town is a fragile thing. Most of them out west lived and died on one single thing, and when that thing disappeared, the whole town went dark like a lamp running out of oil. Most often it was gold. Or silver. The American West filled up with towns that were born the day someone struck a vein in the hills. Overnight, a patch of empty desert became a boomtown. Thousands of miners pouring in, saloons and hotels going up in a week, streets full of mud and money and music. For a few wild years, these towns roared, and then the ore ran out. The day the mine gave up its last, the people packed what they could carry and left. Within months, a town of 10,000 souls stood empty. The buildings stayed, the people did not. Sometimes it was the railroad. A town would live or die by whether the tracks came through. When the railroad chose a route, towns bloomed along it like flowers. But when the line moved, or a new highway bypassed the town by even a few miles, the travelers stopped coming. The gas stations emptied, the diners closed, and a town that once buzzed with passing life slowly starved in silence just off the road that forgot it. And sometimes, the reason was darker. A fire that took everything. A flood. A sickness that swept through and didn't leave enough people to bury the dead. Or things folks won't quite explain and only mention in a low voice after the sun goes down. Out in the high desert stands a town that was once one of the richest in its territory. It had an opera house. It had hotels with chandeliers, a main street of proud brick buildings, banks heavy with silver. For a couple of decades, it was a place of music and money and Saturday nights that never seemed to end. They said the silver ran so free out there that a working man could strike it rich by breakfast. And then the silver played out. First a few families left, then whole streets emptied. The railroad that once brought fortune seekers now carried them away. In just a few years, that glittering town was reduced to empty facades and buildings the desert began to claim. Today, if you walk its main street, you pass beautiful storefronts with no one behind the glass. The desert wind whistles through the opera house, where there was once applause. And at night, they say, you can still hear music drifting from somewhere. No one can ever say from where. Up in the mountains sits a different kind of ghost town, and a sadder one. A mining camp perched on a steep grade, its houses stacked up the hillside. When the mine shut down, the people came down off that mountain looking for work, taking what they could, leaving behind what was too heavy to move. And over the years, the snow and the silence began to swallow the town whole. Today it's a maze of gray weathered timber, collapsed roofs, and a quiet so deep the few who hike up say they can hear their own heartbeat. Visitors tell of hearing footsteps on the boardwalk that belonged to no one, of a piano playing somewhere in the empty dark, of doors that were shut standing open when they came back around. Because that's the part that raises the hair on your arms, the stories people still tell. In nearly every ghost town, folks from the towns nearby have something to say. That lights flicker in the windows of houses where no one lives. That you can hear voices, children laughing, the echo of a dance that ended 100 years ago. That someone went in to explore and came back pale and wouldn't say what they saw. There's the story, told in ghost towns all across the West, of the woman who stayed. When everyone else left, she wouldn't go. She was waiting for someone, they say. A husband gone to the mine that caved in. A son who rode off and never wrote. And so she stayed, growing old alone among the empty houses, watching the road, until one winter she was gone too. But her figure, they say, still appears at a window sometimes, still waiting, still watching the road for the one who never came home. Are these stories true? That's for you to decide. But here's what can't be argued. A place where so many people lived and died, where there was so much joy and so much heartbreak, doesn't go completely empty. Something lingers, even if it's only memory, even if it's only an echo on the wind. Then there are the towns the road forgot. When Route 66 was the great highway of America, hundreds of towns thrived along it. Motels with neon signs, diners with chrome counters, gas stations where a kid in a cap filled your tank and washed your windshield. Whole towns lived on the travelers passing through, chasing the American dream west. And then the interstate came, the wide new highway that bypassed the old road entirely, sometimes by only a mile or two. But a mile was enough. The travelers vanished overnight. The neon went dark. The motels emptied. And those towns, once alive with passing strangers, were left stranded beside a road that no one drove anymore. Today their signs still stand, rusting and faded, advertising vacancies to no one. The diners sit with their stools still bolted to the floor, waiting for a breakfast crowd that will never come. Out on the Great Plains, there's another kind of ghost town, the farming towns that dried up and blew away. When the dust storms came, when the wells ran dry, when the young people left for the cities and never returned, these little prairie towns simply faded. A grain elevator standing alone against a huge empty sky. A main street of boarded windows. A schoolhouse with the swings still hanging, creaking in the wind, though no child has swung on them in 50 years. There's a particular ache to those places. They weren't killed by any disaster. They just slowly emptied, one family at a time, one funeral at a time, one moving truck at a time, until one day the last person turned out the light and drove away, and the town was simply over. There's a kind of forgotten place that unsettles people more than any other, the abandoned mine itself. Not the town around it, but the dark mouth in the mountainside where the men went down. All across the west, these old shafts still gape open, timbers rotting, headframes leaning against the sky like skeletons. Thousands of men went down into that dark, and plenty never came back up. Cave-ins, floods, bad air. The mountains kept them. Folks who live nearby will tell you to stay away from those old workings, and not just because they're dangerous, though they surely are. They'll tell you the miners never really left, that on still nights you can hear the ring of a pick down in the dark, that lanterns have been seen bobbing deep in shafts that have been empty for a century. The old miners had a name for the spirits down there. They believed in them enough to leave offerings. And who's to say they were wrong? Then there are the abandoned amusement parks, and there may be nothing in America eerier than those. Places built for pure joy, for laughter and cotton candy and screaming down a roller coaster on a summer night. And then, for one reason or another, they closed. The gates were chained, and the rides were left to rust exactly where they stood. Picture a Ferris wheel frozen against a gray sky, its cars swinging empty in the wind. A carousel with painted horses cracked and peeling, mid-gallop, going nowhere. A roller coaster with a forest growing up through its tracks. The laughter is gone, but somehow the place remembers it. People who sneak into these parks say the silence there is the loudest silence they've ever heard, because your mind keeps filling it with the sounds that should be there and aren't. And out in the deserts of the Southwest, there are the strangest ruins of all, the towns built for a single purpose that simply ended. Old military outposts, test sites, company towns thrown up around a factory or a plant that closed. Whole neighborhoods of identical houses standing empty in the sand, doors banging in the wind, a school with a flagpole and no flag, a swimming pool full of nothing but tumbleweeds and sun. There's a loneliness to those places that gets into your bones. They were never old, they were just left. There are also the towns that water took. When America built its great dams in the last century to bring power and water to the growing cities, whole valleys were flooded on purpose. The people living there were bought out, moved out, sometimes forced out, and made to watch as the water rose slowly over their homes, their churches, the graveyards where their people lay. Today those towns rest at the bottom of quiet reservoirs, and in years of drought, when the water drops low, they come back. A church steeple breaking the surface, a bridge, the top of a bank, rising from the water like something returning from the dead. People drive for miles to stand on the shore and look at the drowned town of their grandparents coming up for air. And there are the towns that fire erased. A single spark on a dry, windy night, a wall of flame down a street of wooden buildings, and by morning, a whole town was ash. Some rebuilt, many didn't. The people scattered, and all that's left is a grid of empty streets, a stone foundation here and there, and the wildflowers that always come back to burned ground. You can stand in the middle of what was once a busy intersection and hear nothing at all but the wind and the birds. What do these forgotten places teach us? Maybe something worth remembering. That nothing lasts forever. That what is full of life today can stand empty tomorrow. That prosperity is only borrowed, and that time, sooner or later, comes to collect on everything. But they teach us something else too. That the people who lived there were real. They loved, they worked, they raised children. They danced on Saturday nights and buried their dead on Sunday. And even though the town stands empty, even though the buildings are falling in, those lives happened. These places are, in the end, monuments to ordinary people who were here once, and now are not. That's why they're worth remembering. Not to fear them, though they'll give you a chill, but to honor what they were. Every fallen wall was somebody's home. Every empty street heard footsteps and laughter and weeping. Every ruined church held the prayers of whole generations. Ghost towns aren't just abandoned places. They're the memory of America, made of weathered wood in silence. And as long as someone remembers them, as long as someone tells their stories, as long as someone walks their streets with respect, these places aren't entirely dead. Now tell me, have you ever been to a ghost town? Have you walked one of these empty streets, or heard the stories the old-timers tell about a place that went quiet? Share it in the comments. The name, the place, the story. Because every one of those tales helps keep these forgotten places from being forgotten completely. And the next time you pass an empty town, a caving-in cabin, a church with no congregation, stop for just a moment. Listen to the silence. Because in that silence still lives the memory of everyone who was ever there. Until next time, and watch your step out there.